Welcome to Just Minding My Business Media. We are so excited that you joined us today. Broaden the scope of exposure for your business by going beyond the interview. Learn more at www.jmmbmediallc.com, or you can email us at jmmbradio@gmail.com. Sometimes you have to kind of die inside in order to rise from your own ashes and believe in yourself and love yourself to become a new person. Gerard Wade. Today we are excited to bring to you Christopher Zara. Am I saying that correctly, Christopher?
That's correct. Good,
All righty
100%.
then. Who is an author and journalist who writes about culture, media, business, and tech. He is a senior editor at Fast Company, where he runs the news desk and leads a team that covers everything from startups and big tech to workplace culture and finance. Before coming to FastCo in 2016, Zara was a deputy editor at International Business Times, a theater critic for Newsweek, and managing editor of the Late Show Business Weekly, which was one of the last theater trade papers in Manhattan. Today, Christopher is here to share with us his story as told in his memoir, Uneducated. Welcome, Christopher.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
How are you this day? We are so honored to have you.
Well, thank you. I'm staying cool. It's about 92 degrees here in New York City, and I am fortunate to work in a nice downtown office building with lots of air conditioning. I normally hate air conditioning, but I'll take it today because we're having one of those late summer heat waves that just becomes sort of an annoying thing in the Northeast.
Yes, we're feeling the same thing in Pennsylvania as
Yeah, so
well.
you know what I'm talking about then.
I do. Okay, give us a little snippet of your journey. How did you
Sure.
get started here?
Well, let's see. I think my reason for coming on today is to talk about the book Uneducated, which ties into my journey. The short version of it is I'm a business journalist, and I've been doing that professionally for almost 20 years here in New York City. I got my start in an unconventional way, and as I worked for a period in the industry, I realized that my background as someone without a college education was pretty unusual for the world of media. Most people in my business tend to go to college, and most often very good colleges. I work with a lot of people who went to Ivy League schools. We have great schools right here in New York where people come out and start working in journalism. And it occurred to me at some point, as I built a career, that my story was somewhat unusual, and I thought it was an opportunity to talk about education and how it defines us, how it how it defines us, and how we look at ourselves through that lens of education. So that was kind of the reason I wrote the book. The book which is called Uneducated, and since I've written the book, I've gotten really just a ton of feedback from people who tell me they can relate to it, and just explain how they their own story or is similar in the sense that they didn't have the academic credentials that are often considered a necessity to succeed in business. And so I really felt like there was an unusual story to tell there, and I've been so far gratified by the response that I've gotten from readers.
I bet, because there's so many people that are quote unquote
Quote unquote, yeah.
not educated by the traditional systems.
Yeah.
I once read a gentleman who went to the library and read books, and because he couldn't afford to go to college.
Yeah. And that used to be a lot. I think the difference now is that used to be probably a lot more common at a time when certain industries were, you know, I guess relatively easier to break into. But one of the things I noticed and I've written about for the New York Times recently is the way we have our system set up now, where these applicant tracking systems that basically almost all big companies use to try to make sure they're finding the right candidates. They really weed out a lot of people for a lot of different reasons. And education is one of the main reasons they'll weed you out. So if you don't have the whatever 4 year or sometimes more degree that is required or is seen as a requirement for the job, you won't even really get your foot in the door, and you won't even get seen. And so there's really, the opportunities just become fewer and fewer for people with that non-traditional background.
And you're absolutely right, because you know some of the companies that collect resumes and things, I noticed they take you through this long questionnaire, and then you got to take this test and all this kind of
Yeah,
stuff. And to me, you are missing out on good talent, because I mean, I have a background in computers. And when I
yeah.
first started, I had no degree. I learned everything on the job, and companies saw that I was interested in learning, and they was interested in teaching. Then,
Yeah, as long as you can, and if you can make that human connection, very often you can make the case for yourself that you're
mhm,
qualified to do the job, even though you don't have the degree. The challenge now is that it's really difficult to get through that first wall of defense that these companies have put up for themselves. They put it up because it's so labor intensive to find talent that they have this software that helps them decide who to pick, but that same software can really do harm to a certain
mhm.
segment of the working population.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. But today I've been noticing in the media that some of the jobs that required a degree, they are now dropping that requirement because their
Yeah.
inability to be able to get staffing. So what's your thought on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm all for that. So this has been a big topic in the business world. You know, I work for Fast Company, which is a leading business magazine, and it's one of the things we've already been, you know, irrespective of the book I just wrote, it's already something that we've kind of been writing about for a few years, what they call skills-based hiring, which is really what you just said. It's companies kind of looking beyond the traditional the college degree as this proxy for someone's ability to do the job. And one of the reasons that it's I think sort of exploded in the last few years is probably pandemic related, and also just some of the labor shortages that have kind of gone along with the pandemic. Companies are doing it in part out of necessity, like they need to find people, and one of the ways they've been able to do that is to reassess how they find people, and that leads them to basically asking tough questions, which is, you know, does that computer programming job really require a 4 year degree? And if not, why can't we just hire people that don't have the degree? So I think it's great. I think it's a challenge for companies to figure that out on a case by case basis, what the skill set should be. But I'm really glad that it's happening, and I'm glad that people are having the conversation.
Yes, I'm glad too, because you know it weeds out some really good people. These
Yeah.
different
Mhm.
computer software packages that they're using
Right.
I mean, and to me, skills are important, but
Yeah.
integrity and how you are as an individual is just as important.
Yeah, and there's been some, I think, early data suggesting that if you do, when you do go the route of finding the non-traditional candidate, you often get a more loyal worker.
Mhm.
The worker rewards you for that by staying longer, you know, by being a little bit more loyal to the company. Now, of course, not always, but
Right.
you're going to probably get some bad seeds too. But I think that I do think that there's some early data that shows promise in the sense that the type of workers that you might get might be a little bit more loyal to the company that hires them.
Yes, and I know I was, when they allowed me to move into other positions and learn, I was totally grateful. You know what I mean? Because I wanted to learn.
Yeah. I read about that a lot in the book, and this is not something that I was really conscious of because I didn't know any differently. But when I was first starting out and I was comparing myself to all the other workers who were really highly educated and had these fancy degrees, I did feel the need to work harder and to stay later and to be better than everybody. I don't know if I can't really say if I was better, but I felt really the need. I
Mhm.
always just thought I was just going to be like, quote unquote, discovered as like, this uneducated fraud, even though I didn't technically, like, I never lied on my resume or anything. Like there were a couple of instances where I got lucky and got hired, and people didn't ask the questions, and I sort of got my foot in the door that way. But I always felt like I was going to get sort of found out and that the rug was just going to be pulled out. And for that reason, I always sort of felt like I had to work a little bit harder than everyone else.
Wow. Wow. So the book,
Yeah.
what kind of snippet, give us a little bit of snippet about what people can expect from the book.
Yeah, so it's a memoir. It mainly deals with my just my personal story, with really starting with school, um which I didn't go very far. And there's a I guess really sort of the first part of the story is really about my experience in school. And the big question that I ask is whether or not, like, did I fail school or did school fail me? And so I went to a public school that was very overcrowded in New Jersey. The teachers didn't have a lot of time for kids who
Mhm.
needed extra time. I had behavioral issues when I was a teenager and was put into the special education system and given this label, what they call emotionally disturbed. And this was in 11th grade. And so they put you in a special school, and that special school, in my case,
Oh,
wasn't in my case, the special school didn't, it didn't do me any favors, and I didn't last very long there. So long story short, I got thrown out of high school in 11th grade. And that was sort of the end of my school career. I got a GED after that. But I really kind of wandered around for the next like decade or so. Like, I worked retail jobs and just sort of didn't really know what I was going to do with my life. And I grew up in a sort of a working class neighborhood in Trenton, New Jersey, where that wasn't uncommon. There were a lot of kids who just didn't finish school and just ended up working retail jobs and things like that. So it was a pretty normal outcome
mhm.
for where I came from. But there was a point when I was about 30 where I realized, like, I really want more than this, and I need to figure out what I want to do with my life. I decided I wanted to try my hand as a writer, and I came to New York City and ended up doing this. I found this unpaid internship at that newspaper that you just mentioned, called Show Business Weekly, which was really one of the last trade papers for the Broadway industry in New York. And it was just a little bit of luck there. Like, when I got the internship, the one of the editors left and they needed an editor. And it was a small newspaper, so when you were the editor there, you just did everything. And I learned on the job how to, basically run a newspaper. And that was my entree into the world of journalism. So there's those two components to the book. One is my sort of failure in school, um, and reassessing that as I go along in my career. And then the other is really my, this sort of imposter syndrome of being this person who really didn't complete high school and now working in this job where very often my colleagues are highly educated with, bachelor's and master's degrees. So that's sort of the two components of the story.
So how do people get the book?
Oh, you can buy it anywhere. It's on Amazon. You could buy it on, but you can buy it at Barnes and Noble. I actually just walked by the McNally bookstore down in Soho. They had it nicely displayed there on the on the new nonfiction section. So you can find it in any bookstore.
Wow.
Um, and it came out in May, and like I said before, every week I get a few emails from people who have read it and just tell me how they appreciate the story that I tried to tell. And I think that it's relatable in a lot of ways. Like I get emails from people who, went to college but feel like the college they went to wasn't good enough. Sometimes people feel like, we're always comparing ourselves to
Yeah.
other people. So I think there's that element of it that is just really, really relatable.
Yes, I have to agree. But, I think the self-talk is, first of all, our society has this particular framework. And if
Yeah.
you don't follow that framework, you don't feel as though you are successful or you are worthy. But at the end of the day, you have to create your own table. And getting to that place where you are able to, because even with a college degree,
Yeah.
doesn't really mean you're going to be successful.
No, it sure doesn't. And that's a really good point to make, because there was some of the feedback that I've received is exactly along those lines where people would say to me, reading your book, you would get the assumption that the only thing, it's sort of like the scarecrow in the Wizard of Oz. Like if he could just have the brain, everything's going to be fine. But really, like that's my impression working as someone without the college degree. It really did feel that way. Like that degree would have solved all my problems. That's not reality, and that's not how things really work. But that's how
Yeah.
it feels when you lack something like that.
Yes. And that's only because society says you'll do better if you have this.
Exactly. And the
And
data says that you will. I mean, if there's broad financial data that will economic data that really spells out pretty clearly that people with college degrees make more money on average. That doesn't mean everyone with a degree, excuse me, is going to be successful, but it does mean when you look at the broad averages, like people with education tend to do better in terms of like financial outcomes.
now I heard you talk about earlier about knowing whether or not you failed the school or the school failed you.
Yeah.
And I think education right now is, well, I know for me in earlier school years, elementary school, high school, I
Mhm.
felt like I was failed. Now that I'm older and I had to relearn a lot of different things and learn a lot of different things because school just didn't teach me that.
Yeah. So you feel like you were failed?
Yes, I do. I feel like I was because, like now, like with my son, I
Hmm.
teach financial literacy,
Yeah.
different things that I feel like that are important to be a well-rounded adult, which should happen in the earlier grades.
Yeah, I mean, financial literacy is so important. I think there seems to be more awareness of it now than when I went to school in the 80s. I don't remember anyone talking about financial literacy. No one told me what the stock market was. No one really explained to me how money works.
Mm.
I think it would have been useful to learn
Yes.
some of that stuff as a younger person. But yeah, I think that's a really good point. I don't really answer the question whether or not I failed school or school failed me, but the one thing I do say is, at the end of the day, like I was the kid and they were the adults.
Mhm.
So yeah, I failed too. I did my part. I was the one who acted up and I was the one who got thrown out, but I was also the kid who needed guidance.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, I don't blame anyone. I certainly don't blame my parents or any individual teachers, but um, like I have nothing but respect for teachers and the profession. But I think that as a whole, the institution, um, they let a lot of kids slip through the cracks.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I have to agree with you there. And I guess back then they wasn't, it was set up for reading, arithmetic.
Yeah.
It wasn't set up for life skills that could help you, be a better adult. Because I mean, like job applications, I don't remember learning how to fill out a job application. I remember my first job, I was like went to my boss and was like, what is this FICA stuff coming out of my check? I didn't authorize this because I didn't know. And I think,
Yeah, that's always a big that's sort of a big reality check there, isn't it? When you get your first check and you're like, wow, what is all this stuff?
yes,
Social Security, when am I going to need that?
absolutely, absolutely. So your story is absolutely amazing. But what made you pick writing?
Well, that's actually an interesting story. It was teachers. As for as little as I was able to accomplish in school, I had a couple of good English teachers who really pulled me aside and said, "You can write," and they encouraged me. And they would pull my assignments out and read them in front of the class as examples and stuff like that. So there was always that little bit of encouragement that I got from teachers was really helpful. It helped me understand my abilities in an objective way. I knew they weren't just saying it to be nice. So I think that's probably how it started. And it's something that I always felt like I could do. Like you see, the thing about writing that's great is you have control over it in a way that you don't have control over a lot of other stuff. Like I think about other disciplines like I don't filmmaking or singing or theater or things that require a lot of collaboration. You have so many different moving parts. When you sit down to write a story, it's just you, and you can make you know you can't make it whatever you want in journalism. You have to you have to give facts, but you can shape the story in the way that you really want to, and you have full control over that, which I think the thing about it that's really appealing for me.
Okay. Wow. This has been amazing, Christopher. And your story, I'm sure many people are going to relate to it because there are plenty of self-made people out there that didn't have an education. I mean, I know quite a few in my
Yeah.
circles, that never went to college, and they are very successful people, found their passion, and doing quite well.
Yeah, and me too. And it's funny that like I've had people pull me aside after the fact after I've written the book and say, "Hey, I didn't go to school either." And I'd be like, "Oh, really? I didn't know that." And that thing about education is that, you don't always know. I also had plenty of people pull me aside here at work and after they heard about the book and say, "Wow, I would have thought you went to Columbia or something." So it's it's interesting to get people's take on it. I certainly hope that people don't think the story I wrote is anti-college or anti-school in any way, because I do feel like one of the takeaways for me is, boy, if I had to do it over again, I really wish I could have gone to college, because I love being in a classroom, and I love to, especially on a nice university campus, where you just sit there and watch the students, and you're like, it is something that I feel like I missed out on.
Yes, and I mean, there's always an opportunity as long as you're still breathing. If that's
Yeah.
something you want to pursue, you can always do that.
Yeah, when work slows down, if that ever happens.
So thank you so much, Christopher. And again, where can people get the book?
Yeah, and thank you for having me. It's called Uneducated, by Christopher Zara. You can buy the book at Amazon, bookstore.org. Any bookstore should sell it. Barnes and Noble, any of the major retailers. The book was published by Little Brown in May of this year. So I hope people check it out, and I hope people like it. And I really appreciate you having me on.
I appreciate you showing up and sharing your story with our audience, because people need
Thanks.
to hear things like this. They need to know that they are enough.
I hope so. Yeah, I hope so. Thank you, Ida.
Thank you and enjoy the rest of your day.